Western civilization has long held itself up to an ideal about progress, about a future that would always be better than the past. But even beyond this pandemic, some fear that confidence in a world of better tomorrows is fading or worse. Joining us now on that, in Brooklyn, New York, Alana Newhouse. She's the founder and editor of Tablet Magazine. And in Montreal, Quebec, Andrew Potter, associate professor at McGill University's Max Bell School of Public Policy and author most recently of On Decline. And we welcome both of you to our airwaves here in the province of Ontario tonight. Alana, you wrote an essay called Everything is Broken. What is the gist of the brokenness that you see?
Well, my essay focuses mostly on the United States and on the decay of a set of interlocking institutions, both cultural and societal and governmental, that ruled and controlled American life basically since the post-war years. And they functioned very, very well. At least in many ways, they functioned well. So well that people came to imagine that they were going to be here forever and that they were going to function well forever. But, and as I think we're going to talk about, institutions decay and break apart and need to get replaced all the time. It's just a feature of human civilization. The important thing for me is people knowing that that's what they're looking at right now.
Yeah, we will get to the point in our conversation where we talk about how you two see us getting out of this. But in the meantime, we want to establish your thesis. Andrew, let's put the subtitle of your book up there, which is Stagnation, Nostalgia, and Why Every Year is the Worst One Ever. Okay, what is the gist of the conditions that you feel has led us to our current decline?
In a lot of ways, it's not much different than Alana's argument, in that I'm arguing that there are a set of interlocking institutional and cultural features of our society that are all sort of acting in a self-reinforcing way, and putting us on a trajectory of decline. And like Alana, I think that it started in the 70s, and so what I argue is that there's a combination of technological stagnation, economic stagnation, which has led to a certain political situation, largely having to do with the increasing role of the internet, all of which is being catalyzed into a situation where the types of collective action that give rise to what we call civilization, the resolution of collective action problems that enable us to have economic growth and technological growth and so on, have just come to a halt, right? That we've basically stopped being able to resolve the collective action problems that we face, and as a result, we're heading into a bit of a decline.
And let me do a quick follow-up with you, Andrew. The decline that you describe, is it more along the lines of something, for lack of a better word, apocalyptic, or is this a bunch of little things that are just all combining at the same time?
No, and I think that's important to point out, right? This isn't the apocalypse. It's in a lot of ways an elaboration of an argument that, or not even an argument, just an idea that the writer William Gibson raises in a book he wrote a few years ago called The Peripheral, and the idea is what he calls the jackpot. And what it is it's a whole bunch of things happening all at once. It's climate change, it's pandemics, it's technological decline, it's lack of faith in democracy. All these things give rise to just an increasing amount of friction and discomfort and decay that just sort of adds up year after year, which is why the sort of subtitle of the book is, each year gets worse and worse, but it's not like some big apocalypse happens. It's that after sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you look back and you think, wow, it's been a while since things were on a roll, and you start to think, oh, it's only in looking back that you realize you've been sort of trending downwards. And I think that's the situation we're in right now, where each year we kind of think, oh, things are going to get better. It's just we're in a bit of a lull here right now, and you look back and you realize, no, it's actually much deeper than that. Things have been trending downward for a while.
Alana, I want to set up my next question to you by reading an excerpt from the essay that you wrote for Tablet. It was almost exactly a year to the day ago. And here's the excerpt. Today's revolution has been defined by a set of very specific values: boundarylessness, speed, universal accessibility, an allergy to hierarchy, so much so that the weighting or preferring of some voices or products over others is seen as illegitimate. Seeing one's own words and face reflected back as part of a larger current, a commitment to gratification at the push of a button, equality of access to commodified experiences as the right of every human being on earth, the idea that all choices can and should be made instantaneously, and that the choices made by the majority in a given moment on a given platform represent a larger democratic choice, which is therefore both true and good until the next moment on the next platform. Let's dive into that a little bit. Are you suggesting that our commitment to technological change is not really working out for us very well at all?
No. What I am suggesting is that our idea that we were going to completely revolutionize the way in which every economy, every individual economy, plus the global economy functions, and then there would be a cascade of effects on communication and on the way in which communities and civic societies are organized and function, was going to have no change at all, and was not going to affect the way that we prioritize values, was nuts. And that in fact, I see this as cyclical. I see that the very, very similar set of chaotic and revolutionary effects happened in the Industrial Revolution. And it's almost like the kind of boa constrictor that swallows a tiger. It takes a long time to metabolize a change like the one that we've gone through. And we have not done that. And in fact, I think we all just imagined that our lives, we just now have email, or we now have Facebook. And that's the change to our life. We can order things quickly on Amazon, and that's the only effect. It's not the only effect. The effect is in every single area of every single person's life. And we need to just look that in the face and then decide then how we want to reorganize our societies given that reality.
Well, I guess I should follow up by asking, if you don't think technology is at the root of so much of what's wrong with us today, why don't you feel that way? Because there's surely no lack of evidence to suggest that so many of our problems are mired in technology performing in a way that we perhaps don't like or certainly didn't anticipate.
I feel that technology is where we see the problems because we have not figured out how we want to use it. Again, the analog of the Industrial Revolution is the best example for me. You can decide that machines are your enemy, which many people did. And that can be the way that you look at things, or you can say these things are instruments. And the question is how we use them. My belief is that yes, the internet has caused enormous problems, but the reason it has caused those problems is because of our absolute falling down on the job of figuring out how best to use them, both individually, at a communal level, at a civic level, at a cultural level, and also governmentally, probably in the biggest way.
Andrew, I suspect every day you and I both read a piece, an op-ed piece somewhere, which says Facebook is the root of all evil and people are getting stupider because they get all their information from Facebook, which encourages them not to vaccinate themselves and to consider the whole thing a hoax, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you stand on the issue of how well technology has affected our sense of well-being?
So this is interesting. I have to say I really liked Alana's piece. And there's one line in it though where she says, where you say, Alana, I'm not looking to turn back the clock to a time before email and before the internet and so on. And I remember thinking, yeah, I would. And the reason is, I think we're both sort of Gen Xers, right? So we both kind of remember what it was like. And I also remember the first wave of the internet, late 1990s, early 2000s, how great it was and how awful it is now. And so while I wouldn't want to, wind it back to maybe the 1980s, I wouldn't have minded freezing technology around 1994, 1995, One of the things I do, or I used to do when I taught a course on technology and philosophy was I would have everybody read this piece that was written about 1995, 96, that was the Cyber Libertarian Manifesto. You guys might remember this. It was written by like John Perry Barlow and Stuart Brand, a lot of these sort of early techno libertarians, and it was this manifesto about the internet and how it was going to be this world free of government, free of authoritarianness, free of control, and it would allow this flourishing of democracy, right? Because it would be a pure communicative tool, right? And that obviously manifestly has not happened. And I think we need to understand why that hasn't happened. And it wasn't because we made a bunch of bad decisions or we haven't, substantially metabolized it. I think it's because we didn't fully appreciate the extent to which baked into technology is a set of presumptions about human psychology and the way we can be triggered to behave in certain ways. There's this thing that the behavioral psychologists picked up on a few years ago, right? That we have like two systems, system one, system two. Malcolm Gladwell had that book Blink about our system one, our quick reaction responses to things. And I think what we don't really understand or didn't appreciate was the extent to which technology could be used to keep us in this state of constantly being triggered, like rats in a lab or like people in a casino. And I think that's the problem right now with the internet is it's turned into one big casino where we're kind of running around being triggered relentlessly by buttons and likes and shares and so on. And it's really undermining the capacity we have for rational thought. And I think that's what the original cyber libertarians didn't understand was just the extent to which the internet would become essentially one big casino that we're all going to sort of wander around in without really rational thought engaged.
Alana,
So
you want to get
can
into that
can I
casino
speak
and
to
try
that?
and roll snake
Yeah,
eyes?
yeah. I first of all, I want to say that if somebody told me that we could rewind the clock back to a moment when Kurt Cobain was still alive, I would say yes. So just as a correction to Andrew's read of my piece. But here's what I want to say. Tablet is a very strange publication in that it's a niche publication, but has a very, at this point, unique readership. A big part of our readership now is no longer Jewish and just comes to Tablet for the perspective on the world. And a huge cohort of those people are under 25. Our readers who are under 25 are the most suspicious of technology, or rather not suspicious, they're the smartest users of technology. They understand what technology does and doesn't do. They no longer use it the way that, let's say, my generation used it. Certainly a generation older than me uses it, even a generation younger than us uses it. They are very smart about it. And I suppose my challenge is to say that not only did those original crypto libertarians get it wrong, but then the reason why they got it wrong was because they didn't realize that it wasn't going to come true for a long time. There were going to be phases to get there. And the mistake I don't want us to make is to imagine that there's one human condition and one human way to relate to the internet. I don't think there is. And in fact, I think it's changing as we speak. My position is that a couple of generations after me, and certainly moving forward, are actually quite healthy, increasingly healthier there's a cohort of them that are increasingly healthier. Their skepticism is real. They know what the internet does and doesn't do. They know what social media does, what it can do and what it can't do, what it's bad and good at. And the question, the scariest part for me has nothing to do with that, because I think that there are going to be human cohorts that will help us correct our relationship to technology. The scariest part is our governments and their connection, the creation of surveillance states. That's the part that strikes me as poison and both deeply poisonous and also fundamentally changeable. So that's where I focus a lot of the energy of change or wanting things to not work to really be different than how they work right now.
Hmm. Andrew, I should follow up with you on that because, of course, from your perch at McGill, you spend a lot of time with 20-somethings, and you would, I guess, you would see lots of firsthand evidence about how smart this generation of 20-somethings are, particularly as it relates to technology. Are they as gloomy about their futures as both of your essays would suggest?
That's a good question, but it's a tough one to answer because we're looking at into our third year of dealing with online teaching of one form or another, and it's hard to disentangle my students' gloominess and unhappiness from the pandemic itself. So it's a very tough question to answer. There's a lot about the new generation that worries me, and things seem to have switched even before the pandemic about how they relate to one another, how they relate to society, how they relate to technology. It's a big question, and yeah, I wouldn't want to speculate about their sort of any of this independent of just this ongoing and very frustrating pandemic.
Understood. Alana, let me try this with you. Do you see a distinction between our lives getting better by one set of metrics? For example, lifespan, relative health, relative prosperity, relative peace in the world, the amount of freedom that we enjoy, the amount of safety that we enjoy nowadays, the entire sum total of knowledge of all time in our hands, the amount of leisure, I guess, pre-pandemic that certainly many people were able to enjoy. Do you see a distinction between all of that and our lives being more fulfilling, however you want to define that?
Yes, but hold on. But before related to that is a larger point, which is I don't see my essay as gloomy. I find it quite hopeful to know that what's broken here are the things that humans made, and humans can remake those things again. In fact, that's the work of society. It's the work of history. So I don't feel, I feel quite optimistic. I understand it's a very hard moment. And I guess I would say that precisely the point I wanted to underscore in the essay is the one that you just made, which is I don't want people to see the meaning or the purpose of their lives as having been in those institutions. It kills me to talk to kids who think that the meaning of their lives is in college. College does not matter. You literally, if I could take Harvard and put it in the middle of the sea and dump it there, I would. It's not important. These institutions don't make us, they shouldn't define us, especially in their decay. So I want to break people from their attachment to seeing these things, these institutions, these entities, all of these credentialing bodies as somehow important. In fact, they're not only important, they're kind of dangerous because they're falling down. And you should divorce yourself from that and try to build new things where you will find not only satisfaction practically, but I think meaning and purpose. So I think that the two things are related, and they're not only related directly, but they're related to my optimism too.
Well said. Let me bring another voice into this conversation, the voice of Margaret Atwood, who was on our program not too long ago. And we talked about this notion of whether progress is inevitable. And here's what she had to say about that. Sheldon, would you run that clip, please?
I don't like the word progressive.
Okay, what should we say?
Why is that? Because it is based on a belief that progress is inevitable, that there's such a thing as the right side of history and that you have to be on it. And neither of those things are true. So history doesn't have sides. And all you have to do is go back and look at it, and one day you're on, quotes, the right side of history, and the next day you're not. It's more like the revolving wheel of fortune. One day you're up, the next day you're down. Public opinion changes. Things that were approved of 50 years ago are now something nobody would ever do. So it's like that, but progress is not inevitable, and it's very dependent on material conditions. So when there's lots to go around, you're more likely to get tolerant public opinion. When there's less to go around, people get scared.
Andrew, do you think she's right to suggest that we temper our hopes as to the inevitability of progress going forward?
Yeah, I really like that clip for a number of reasons. It's interesting. I like that bit at the end where she said that one of the things we neglect is material conditions, and the reason is because as much as I really liked Alana's piece, I think it focuses mostly on the cultural elements of what's going on right now, and I think what I and there's a tendency to sort of assume that culture drives everything, right? Especially in the United States, that was sort of Steve Bannon's motivating argument, right? Was that politics is downstream from culture, and that if you can sort of own or control or sort out the culture, everything sort of follows from there. And what I try and argue in my book is that actually a lot of what's going on in the culture right now is a consequence of material conditions, that is, technological and economic stagnation. And I think Margaret Atwood hit the nail on the head where she said, look, one of the things we know, and this is an argument from Benjamin Friedman, the Harvard economist. I mean, we can put Harvard in the sea, but Benjamin Friedman had something smart to say in his book on the moral consequences of economic growth, where he said, look, we tend to think that economic growth is great because it gives us stuff, right? It makes us comfortable and it makes us healthy and so on. But it also makes us better people. And the reason economic growth makes us better people is because when people think that the world is getting better, when they think they're going to be more comfortable, when they think they're going to be more secure, when they think they're going to be healthier and so on, they become more open-minded, more tolerant of diversity, more tolerant of immigration. They stop looking askance at their neighbors because things aren't zero-sum, right? By contrast, when you have periods of stagnation or even economic retrenchment, people start to look around and they see a zero-sum world, right? And they worried about immigrants, they worry about diversity, they worried about difference. And so I think she's absolutely right that I do think that one of the big problems here that is driving a lot of what's going on right now is the ongoing and quite serious economic stagnation we're into right now.
Alana, there's this great quote of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s in which he says, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Do you still believe that?
Yeah, I would just encourage people to understand that whatever view of the arc they have, it's much bigger. Things often have a longer trajectory, both longer and shorter trajectories than people assume. There's a quote from a writer that I love, which is that it's not the end of the world, it's just the end of you. And what I really like about it is that that's right. I mean, we really have to understand that what's happening in our own lives may not be does not give us the full view of what's happening more broadly. And so to the extent that we should adjust our work, what we focus on, our own priorities, that's good to know that. It also means that we should adjust our expectations.
All right. Well, you have told us throughout this conversation that you are optimistic about the future and our ability to sort of recreate the institutions which may be letting us down today. How do you see that happening?
I think we have to build new ones. I really do believe that. I believe that we have to really, we have to get into a mindset that everything we know might be irrelevant. That goes for every cultural institution. Do you think that books should have these X publishers? Imagine they don't anymore. Imagine every single book publisher, every single movie studio, every single college and university, every single governmental organization. Imagine that none of it exists tomorrow. What do we build in its place? And to me, that feels very exciting, and it feels hopeful. It also feels like where a lot of the younger people that, at least that I encounter, want to focus. That's where they want to be. They want to be in a world where they can focus on what they can build. As one of them said to me, like, I love my parents very much, but if I have to sit with them and obsess about the New York Times for one more minute, I'm actually gonna like kill someone. And like, they're like, I don't care. I don't care about the New York Times. I don't care what's going on college campuses. I don't actually care about any of this. I just want to build something new. And that energy is where I get enormous hope, enormous optimism. It's where I want to live.
Andrew, is that a tough sell for, let's say, university students who are going tens of thousands of dollars into debt on the assumption that all of what they're engaged in right now is relevant and will lead them to a better tomorrow?
You know, that's interesting, because what I think Alana really kind of hit the nail on the head there, where one of the things that's happening that is a lot different from when I was a student is when I was a student in the early 1990s, right? What happened on university campuses stayed on university campuses, and largely what's going on right now is the logic and culture and psychology of being a student has simply taken over the entire society, right? It's taken over newsrooms, it's taken over businesses, it's taken over governments, and so on. Which I hope Alana's right that this is just something that's going to get eventually flushed out. Because and she may be right, and I hope she is, that ultimately we're going through a bit of a cultural madness right now that's going to get flushed out one way or another. But I think I think if that happens, it'll be a good thing and it will help. I don't think it's going to solve our long-term problems. I think the long-term problems are much more deep and much more structural than the culture, although the culture is certainly a huge part of the problem.
But Alana,
What
just
I
to
would
say,
just say, I just
yeah,
want to say
please.
one thing. I don't know which way the arc bends, but but my sense of human history is that it bends away from what's very annoying. And what's happening here is very annoying. Like, it's just too frustrating and hard to follow. And it feels impinging on people's ability to actually live full and happy lives. And to me, that's the best indication that it will get flushed out, that eventually it just has to, the human impulse to just want this to get off us is going to prevail.
Well, Andrew, let me give you the last word, and that would be to respond to this. You know, every generation has always assumed, certainly in our lifetimes, and I think you can go back even before that the next generation would do better than the previous. We have surveys now which tell us this generation no longer believes that. How much trouble does that put us in?
I think it's a huge amount of trouble. It's funny, that line, right? The first generation do worse than its parents has actually been around for a very long time. I actually did a little research a while ago. It actually appears like in an essay in the Atlantic in like 1980, and then Douglas Copeland made it sort of the rallying cry of Generation X. That call has been wrong every year for every generation until now. And I used to sort of poo-poo the millennials complaining about how badly things were for them. And right now, things are actually pretty bad, especially on the housing front and the job front. So I'm really concerned that, and it's not just economics, not just housing. Recent studies came out showing 18 to 24-year-olds, they're not having sex. Right? Like the actual amount they're having sex is lower, and it's not just like the pleasure and the that comes from relationships and sex and so on. It's like they're not having kids. This is not a healthy trajectory for a society, right? And so I think this is hugely problematic, and I'm really worried about it.
Well, if that is problematic, one thing that isn't, and please convey this to your daughter, Andrew, she did a wonderful job on your fingernails, which we have occasionally caught sight of during the course of this discussion. So please let her know that. Andrew Potter from McGill University, Alana Newhouse, the editor of Tablet. It's really great of both of you to spend so much time with us on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.